Hello, my name is Ryan Scannell, and I'm an assistant professor of rhetoric and writing at San Jose State University in San Jose, California, USA. I want to thank the organizers of the International Conference on Humanities and Social Sciences for having me participate in today's event. I regret that I can't be in Islamabad today, but I'm thankful for the opportunity to at least present my paper. What I'll be talking about today is both the subject and the title of my talk is Why Studying Writing Matters. So in the past century and a half, the most commonly required course in American higher education has been first-year composition. Millions of U.S. students have been required to take some form of first-year composition, and historian John Brereton calls it, quote, the largest single enterprise in American higher education, end quote. First-year composition, as the name implies, is usually required in the first year of college. In general terms, it is an introductory writing course intended to prepare students for the writing tasks they will be asked to undertake in college and in their future careers. For the last 100 years or so, first-year composition has been required for the majority of post-secondary students at U.S. institutions, which range widely in quality, cost, prestige, and selectiveness. Harvard University, for example, which is routinely ranked among the top 5 universities in the world, accepted less than 6% of its applicants last year. Nearly every one of the students who ended up attending, regardless of their already impressive qualifications, is nevertheless required to take Expos 20, Harvard's version of the required first-year composition course. At the same time, virtually every community college, which are schools that are required to accept basically every student who graduates from high school, also require first-year composition. First-year composition in American colleges and universities is not precisely the topic of my talk today. I'm planning to make assertions about the importance of students and faculty studying writing beyond the first year. But a deeper understanding of first-year composition's place in higher education is useful for understanding the place of writing instruction and research in higher education more generally. So I want to begin by talking about the required first-year course, because I think it gives us a useful starting point for thinking about common assumptions that pertain to studying writing in colleges and universities. I hope you'll forgive me if I provide some additional historical background to contextualize the argument I want to make about the value of studying writing. For starters, it's important to note that first-year composition is not strictly a U.S. phenomenon any longer. Post-secondary writing instruction is becoming an increasingly common international requirement. Universities in Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, and South America, as well as countries in North America beyond the U.S., are beginning to install various first-year composition requirements. So while at least some of what I say will be specific to the U.S. Context, the implications are increasingly global. First-year writing requirements may take on different characteristics in different places, depending on the local needs, but there's a recognizable consistency to many first-year writing requirements from one region of the world to the next. The feature that I want to focus specifically on is the tendency to characterize first-year writing as a preparatory course, which has been with the course since its inception. In fact, from first-year composition's invention at Harvard in the late 1800s, the course has at least tacitly implied a form of remediation. Historians in the field of rhetoric and writing studies have argued for decades that Harvard's course was the model for all subsequent first-year composition courses in the U.S., and by extension, many of the courses worldwide. When the first-year requirement was designed at Harvard, there were indications from faculty and administrators that the required course was intended to quote-unquote fix underprepared students. In other words, students supposedly came to Harvard with a shocking inability to write at a college level, and the first-year composition requirement was designed to make up for the failures of secondary school teachers and of the students themselves. I have recently argued elsewhere that Harvard's course played a slightly different role in the 19th century than other historians believe. I think that first-year composition was actually designed at Harvard to attract new populations of students from public secondary schools. Before the mid-1800s, Harvard students were drawn almost exclusively from elite academies in the immediate geographical region. So Harvard's in the northeast corner of the United States, and almost all of its students came from New England within 15 to 20 miles of Harvard. By the late 1890s, or the early 1890s, a rapidly increasing proportion of Harvard students were from geographically dispersed public schools. Increases in matriculation from public schools and from enhanced geographical mobility were national trends in U.S. higher education at that time. I contend that first-year composition was actually designed as a form of marketing intended to entice geographically dispersed, public school-trained high school graduates to attend. Whether the first-year requirement was a punishment or an enticement, however, there has nevertheless long been the sense that post-secondary writing instruction is for novices. By definition, the first-year requirement is an introduction to concepts and practices that are supposed to serve students in their subsequent tasks. Harvard's course description indicates, for example, that Expos 20 is supposed to, quote, teach students the fundamentals of writing academic argument, end quote. The sentiment that writing instruction is appropriate for teaching students fundamentals is widely generalizable across first-year requirements around the world. And until relatively recently, first-year composition has often been the only explicit writing instruction universities offered. The one potential exception is creative writing majors, but those courses almost never help students study quote-unquote non-creative writing. Perhaps I'm belaboring the point, but I do so because the equation of post-secondary writing instruction with first-year composition has resulted in a similar equation of post-year secondary writing instruction with entry-level work and remediation. In other words, the practice of studying writing in higher education is codified in first-year writing requirements as a thing you learn prior to content, prior to history, prior to literature, prior to all the other subjects. In the U.S. context, professors and administrators and even students often believe that writing is a thing they should have learned before coming to college, and studying their writing is therefore a regrettable corrective. Obviously, the implicit logic here is contradicted by the nearly universal requirement of first-year composition. Surely not every college student in the U.S. is unable to write at a college level. Nevertheless, these tacit beliefs about writing instruction's remedial quality have had consequences. Specifically, writing instruction in U.S. colleges and universities has either taken the form of creative writing courses for students who want to learn to write poems and novels, or writing instruction has been relegated to the first year of college for students. And although creative writers have been seen as pursuing a craft, it's not unusual to hear faculty and administrators describe students who want or need non-creative writing instruction in terms of deficiency. Rhetoric and writing models call this the deficit model of writing instruction, which suggests that students come to colleges and universities with a deficit of preparation, which we then fill with first-year composition. The effects of the deficit model have marked the entire U.S. higher education system for decades. Until very recently, writing instruction has been all but absent from upper division, graduate, and professional contexts in higher education, even though there's been a sharp increase in writing requirements for students and professors in higher education around the world. For instance, faculty in countries from US to Pakistan, China to Brazil, Turkey to South Africa, and everywhere in between are seeing significant increases in publication expectations. Failure to produce research articles, often in scholars' second or third or fourth language, can result in not being promoted or even in losing one's job. Still, even with the critical expansion of academic and professional writing requirements, and even with the increasing presence of students in U.S. education who need writing instruction beyond the first year, writing instruction has largely retained the complexion of remediation as a thing people should have already learned. In other words, in many places, writing is still not a thing students can study, and writing is not a thing that most faculty think is valuable to study. But writing is not a thing people should have already learned. In the past several decades, writing researchers around the world have begun carefully documenting the significant challenges of writing, even for people who write for a living. We know, for instance, that writing is not a discrete skill, which means good writing is not a thing you achieve once and for all. Writing is highly contextual and relies on sliding values of purpose, audience, language, and genre if it is to be meaningful. Moreover, these different aspects of the writing situation change virtually every time a writer writes, even in different stages of the same project. In other words, research tells us that writing is a lifelong process of learning and relearning. It is not a thing people should have already learned, ever. Writing researchers also extensively document the reality that drilling students in skills such as grammar knowledge, quote-unquote proper usage, and mechanical accuracy do not transfer well to writing situations. They can be useful in some cases for language acquisition, especially for writers who are writing in non-native languages. But however important it is, language acquisition also does not transfer directly to writing situations. A third lesson writing researchers have learned is that writing is not a simple act of transcription. In my field, rhetoric and writing studies, we have long assumed what is called a right-to-learn model of writing instruction. The right-to-learn model is the exact reverse of the much more common belief that writing is a simple act of transcribing thoughts. This much more common model, what I'm inclined to call the genius model of writing, is based on the idea that thinking good thoughts is the truly hard and important work, and writing is just a mechanical act. The right-to-learn model, on the other hand, is based on the idea that writing contributes to learning, changes what is being thought, and helps writers make complex connections. Writing helps writers process complex information and learn new things. As writing theorist Richard E. Miller argues in Writing at the End of the World, there is value in using writing, quote, as a technology to think with, rather than as a tool for succinctly recording thoughts of others or as a weapon for fending off other points of view, end quote. For most people, whether they know it or not, writing is recursive and generative. It is not simply subsequent to thought. These lessons and many others that have been learned by rhetoric and writing specialists over the past few decades directly contradict the prevailing assumptions about writing that inform most first-year writing requirements. Writing is not a set of skills that can be treated as a deficiency to be solved in first-year students. As writing researchers Paul Pryor and Karen Lunsford argue, writing is complex, multidisciplinary, and ecological. As they note, quote, writing can signify an artifact, an individual capacity to act, a situated activity, a technology, or a mode of social organization, end quote. Given the sprawling complexity of writing that they document, they advocate reorienting writing research to encompass multiple disciplines, multiple theoretical frameworks, and international perspectives. I think developing a much more sophisticated research infrastructure, particularly in an international context, is a very worthwhile undertaking. But my objective today is rather more modest. What I'm advocating is for people in higher education, to take up the study of writing as a part of what they already teach and study. This would entail learning relatively basic terminology about genre, argument, style, audience, and purpose in order to determine exactly what writing is, what it does, and how it works in relation to disciplinary research. By studying writing more explicitly, we stand to 1. Become better writers ourselves, 2. Become better teachers of our subjects because we can teach students about discourse conventions alongside our disciplinary knowledge, and 3. Understand our individual disciplines better by recognizing ways that writing connects what we do and how we do it and how we argue about it across disciplinary borders. But even for people who determine that studying writing is not a good use of their own time, it is still an opportune time to reorient our understandings of what writing is in colleges and universities and what it should be. It is time to shed the negative sense that studying writing is a practice of fixing deficiencies and begin to realize that studying writing is a crucial, ongoing process for students and faculty alike. Thank you for your time. I hope the conference goes very well, and I hope next time I have an opportunity to participate in person.